anybody who hasn't, I always stand right where that light is. For anybody who hasn't been before, through that doorway to the left is the public washrooms as well as a water fountain. That door there is an emergency exit and it is a lounge. So if you just feel a little warm, go that way, not that way, please. But if we do have to evacuate, that door heads right outside. So everybody is here tonight for the fabulous talk on seed starting indoors. It's perfect timing because it sort of feels spring-like outside. Superior seed producers are here and they've brought their vast wealth of knowledge. They have got a presentation for us, but they're really, really amazing at answering all your questions. If you need anything library related, you can come grab one of us from out there. Otherwise, I will turn it over to you. All right, thanks ladies.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. So my name is Ayano Dempsey, and this is Janna.
Blyderveen.
And so we are both seed producers for superior seed producers. And so today we'd like to talk about starting seeds indoors. So who amongst you has already started something inside? Yeah. Okay, cool. Who's just about to? Who's got the itch and want to get started as soon as possible? Yeah, I've started mine like a couple weeks ago. They're just little sprouts now, but yeah, always in February I'm like, do I do it now? Do I do it now? It's always a struggle, you know, exercising self-restraint. So yeah, we're gonna do this talk today, and hopefully you won't make the same mistakes that I sometimes make. And hopefully you can do it so that we'll have good times in the summer. So should we?
You want to tell us about your garden?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot. So, part of the reason why there's two of us here today is we both grow, but we grow in different ways. So I grow in my backyard. It's just a regular city-sized lot. It's not particularly large, and I grow a lot of things in a very small space. So I think I have about 500 square feet cultivated, and I get about 500 pounds of vegetables out of it. Janna, on the other hand, grows on a larger scale.
I work, I'm the farm manager for Roots Community Food Center, so we have two urban lots. One is volunteer pool, the other one is Lily Street Garden, which is here. And we grow food for our programs to teach them how do we grow food, what do we use, what grows well up here. And then the food we sell at a market on site. And then also the food is used in our community food meals. So we have senior meals Wednesdays and Fridays, and a lot of our produce gets put into that as well. So yeah, we grow under just about 2 acres, and it's mixed produce, and it's a lot of fun. Roots does not have the space to start seeds inside, so we contract out to CPG Farm, and you know their seedlings, and I've also grown and done a lot of this on my own, but just recently I don't do it. But I do all the crop plan when things are seeded, and then from there, yeah, Marcel helps us out. She's a great woman. Anything else? Alright, so some environmental factors that we'll look into. So mostly that's the frost date, when do you want to start, how you want to start, how you're going to care for them, and then when to transplant.
So, the main reasons why a lot of us start seeds indoors is that, you know, by doing that you can sort of extend your growing season. And when you're doing it yourself, you can sort of control a lot more, like germination, growing conditions, and so, you know, instead of just going out, you know, to a nursery or to a box store in June and seeing what's out there, you get to, you know, grow it yourself and control how they're grown and get the seedlings hopefully that you want yourself. And also sometimes it's that the box stores don't have that exact tomato you want, and it's easier to, you know, mail order seeds, you know, different seed varieties by mail than by transplants from nurseries, because they usually just grow their like, top 6 bestsellers or crop success improves because of improved plant density and head start over weeds. So when you're putting like a juvenile plant, let's say, as opposed to a seed or like a tiny sprout, that plant already has a head start, so it's gonna start, growing faster and spreading its leaves more, and the weeds don't get a chance to compete as much. And another good reason is succession planting. It allows crops to be started before garden space is available. So sometimes you plant radishes, and the radishes are gonna come out in, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, let's say, and, during those 3-4 weeks, you can start something else, like a tomato inside, and by the time the radish comes out, that tomato's ready to go in, and that way you can sort of use your space more effectively and more efficiently. So, seeding schedule, indoors and outdoors. Mostly frost date will determine when you can transplant, and to schedule and calculating backwards, schedule seeding dates. You have to take into account how frost hardy seedlings are. Tomatoes and peppers, they're very frost sensitive, whereas cabbage and lettuce, they've got a bit more wiggle room in terms of tolerating cold. You also should know optimal soil temperature. So soil temperature and ambient temperature, not the same thing. So even if you think it's a beautiful sunny day, it's really warm, it feels warm, down in the soil, chances are it's still pretty frigid. And also, how much do you need is a really good thing to consider.
Sometimes they say to plant start maybe 30% more just in case some fail, right? You always want to have something that I think I missed a slide. So back here, we just show the hardiness zones and the history, how it's changing. So I did a trial once, and they said to plant it June 1st, but I knew the week before the weather was optimal. I'm like, I'm gonna plant a week ahead of time, and it was good I did, because in August we had heavy winds and it knocked down all my amaranth. That was the crop I was growing.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm having a really hard time hearing back here.
Yes.
Dear.
Sorry. No, and ventilation too. Alright, so I took a record looked at the last frost date last year was June 2nd, and that was the temperature it was, and then September 6th. But you want to start, some seeds say start 10 weeks. So that you take that date and then count 10 weeks back, and that's when you're gonna start that seed. So 10 weeks back, I counted, and it's around June 17th, St. Patrick's Day. So that's usually when I would start mine.
And also, everybody's got microclimates, whether you live in, West Fort or Fort Arthur. If you've got a thermometer, then it's a pretty good idea, maybe first in the morning, just, take a record of it so that you know for yourself. Generally, like if the forecast says this, my garden is, this much warmer or this much colder, because I think the forecast weather station's probably at the airport or something like that. And that's usually like 2-3 degrees warmer than my backyard, for example. So it's good to kind of have a ballpark idea of how different you are from the official forecast.
Oh. And then here, this is a site that I like to use. Here. This is gonna take me, so you don't know, there are calculators out there and algorithms that will give you what you need to know. Yeah. This is in the States, but you could put in my last frost day. What was it? June 2nd? Did anything change? Yeah, like April 17th. And I can show you dates. And then when he wants to transplant it out. Anyway.
have started already. What did you start indoors?
Peppers,
Mm-hmm. Peppers.
tomatoes,
Mm-hmm.
onions.
Onion, yeah. That's a pretty good one too. Yeah, I find onions and by extension things like chives take quite some time, so those are the first ones I would start if I'm starting onions. I'm not doing them this year. I've also started peppers like some of you have. I've started my eggplants. Not my tomatoes yet. I'll be starting some herbs soon because some of them take what seems like forever to grow. Yeah, what about you, Janna?
Perennials, so like
Oh, yeah.
echinaceas and your, rudbeckia.
Yeah.
You want flowers in your garden, so also we can start those.
Mm-hmm.
Broccoli, cabbage, we start indoors as well, but those are later.
Yeah.
They're more towards end of April.
Yeah, and cucumbers, some people start like from seed outside as well. I think it works both ways. I start mine indoors, but lots of people opt to just direct, so I think. But yeah, definitely squash I'll do indoors as well. Yeah.
Cucumbers are a good one to succession plant, so like you could start some indoors, they would produce earlier for you, then they'll stop producing, but the ones that you direct seeded will produce a little bit afterwards.
So there's some things that just don't like to be transplanted, so it's really not worth the trouble of starting them indoors. Those would be legumes like peas and beans, sunflowers, and also some root crops like carrots. Those are the ones that grow grow from a single taproot. So they don't take very well to manhandling too much. That being said, I have started beets as seeds from seeds indoors and had success, but I wouldn't do carrots. Yeah, a lot of those I would just do directly on the ground. And some of these you kind of got an option of direct seeding or starting in pots. So lettuce I start in pots because, as Janna says, that allows me to sort of plan things, like stagger them by 2 weeks. Beets I had success with. So the thing with beets is each seed is actually like a cluster, and you get 2, 3, 4 sprouts out of it. I'm really terrible with thinning things out. I forget or I don't notice, and then they get crowded. So if I do it, in a little cell, then I've got no excuse not to see it. Swiss chard, same reason. I do them in pots. Rutabaga, you can do them from seed, like direct seed. I like to do them in little cell packs, mostly because rutabaga seeds are so tiny, and same as turnip. That's a great turnip. Like I can't really space them apart, very well, and the sprouts are so tiny. It's hard to tell if they're, weeds or not. So I find it better to just start them until they've got a couple of true leaves, and then that way they've got a head start over weeds, and also I don't accidentally weed it because that happens.
Yeah, I start lettuce indoors as well as Swiss chard. The other ones I direct seed. And the Swiss chard, I just want big leaves ready for my first market. And this is kind of when we start each thing, so it's very different between the two of us.
Yeah, I'm quite a bit earlier. I think it's probably because I'm growing a lot of these things in my basement. I don't have a greenhouse. I've got very limited, space for shelves and lights, that sort of thing. And so I've got my plants are on like day shift and night shift. They get 12 hours a day. I swap out the trays. Ideally, they get more light per day, like 14 to 16. And I think that's why if you're able to give them more light, then they don't need as many days. I think they just, all things need an, X number of, hours of light. And so like me, if you're not able to give more than 12 a day, then I start earlier.
So the risk of starting too early, so at the end photo you got something that's really pot bound, and then when you want to go transplant that, you're gonna break up the roots a bit, but then it has a hard time establishing into the soil and it could set it back. And then we have molds. These ones here are getting enough sunlight. You can see they're growing towards the light. And the last one is
Damping off.
dumping off, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's when it gets too much moisture.
Mhm. So generally, if you see your seedlings leaning towards a light or getting, a really long stem, that's a sure sign that it's not getting enough light. Or, if they're long but upright, maybe your lights are too far away. I keep my lights pretty close, like within an inch of the tops. And I find that generally, like a sunny window doesn't work well. Maybe it's just my house, but I don't get enough sunlight hours. There's not enough space, so I use artificial lights.
What makes it mold like that?
Mold? I mean, mold spores are everywhere, and I
But
think
is that
molds.
just because you left it in too long or too?
Yeah, too damp.
Too damp?
Yeah, mostly, and you can't 100% eliminate mold because mold spores are everywhere. They just like damp, warm conditions in general. So to deter mold, sometimes you can water from the bottom so that the top surface remains a little, not as wet. You could also have a fan going because that will kind of keep things nice and dry. Fans can also help, with seedlings that are leggy and sort of, have long, weak stems. So you can't 100% avoid mold, but it's kind of like you're trying to stay ahead of it so that there's not enough of it to actually kill the plant. And the younger the plant is, if it's just a sprout, it's more likely to be killed by mold compared to something that's already this tall, thick.
And it helps to start with sterilized soil.
Mhm.
So not always reusing your potting soil from the past years. It's good to start with fresh sterile. And then how to start your seeds. So the one on the end, I'm just doing a germ test. That's not really how you do it because I got beans in there, some squash. I just wanted to know if they're gonna survive if I want to plant them next year, and it was a successful germination rate. So there are different methods, but there's seeding into cells. So there's all sorts of sizes. Some are really small, like the 200. Those are small. That's what I would start onions in, maybe. And then they're easy to handle. They clump together. They're reusable, but they can be a vector for plant disease. So it's important to clean off your trays before you use them again. So at the end of the season, I'll whack those out, clean them with a hose, and then I will sanitize them in a bleach solution before I use them again. And then there's soil blocks. This is what Sleepy G uses. It's a press, and it reduces waste. And then you have a strong root system, so oxygen will hit their roots, and then they'll be like, I can't grow anymore because this is the size that I'm in. And then once you get them into the ground, they'll start growing again. I like them, but you have to invest in getting all these stamps, but you could use them year and year again.
Yeah, what I'm using this year is kind of halfway between the two. So I used to use those cells, the flimsy cells. You can buy them sort of like a sheet that fits into a tray like this. This is a 10 by 20 or I forgot 11 by 21 standard tray. And so I like to use inserts that kind of fit into this because I don't want to be juggling things outside of this. And you can use those flimsy cell packs. I used to use ones that have four, and there's 12 of them, so that's 48 per tray. But I found that they were really flimsy and end up being garbage after a year. I tried to reuse them, but they don't stand up very well. So I got these, and they're made of sturdier plastic, and they've also got these bigger holes. And it's sort of the same idea as soil blocks. So the more it's exposed to air, the better it is supposed to be for the seedling. Also because, well, it dries out more, which is, you know, good and a bad thing, so you have to water more. But hopefully it means less mold, and also it's really easy to pop them out. I just stick my finger in the bottom and the whole thing pops out, and I can transplant it easier. So, yeah, there's lots of different ways to do it. I mean, you could use yogurt containers, whatever you have, whatever works for you. But just remember that, you know, you're gonna have to water them, you're gonna have to probably move them around a bit. So, you know, you want to also think about convenience for yourself, what works for you.
And they need drainage holes.
Mhm.
And I know, I think the Friends of Conservatory, they always have a sale of their past used trays, so like that's a good place to get some for a fairly good price. So a germination space, that varies. When I was working at the conservatory, we had some amazing germination table. It had lights, under was humidifier, rolled down plastic tarps. It was really nice, but sometimes we just gotta use what we have. So at my home, it's an old house, it's got radiators that get up to like 20 degrees, so I just have my trays on there. But otherwise, yeah. And then you need lighting, heating, and ventilation, your different cells, germination mats, potting mix, and your seed. So relative humidity is 60 to 90%. But like if you're in your house, it's hard to get that humidity, and you don't want to be living in that. So that's why like an enclosed space would help you get that humidity. And then ideal lighting requirements are 14 to 16 hours of light, and then your average area temperature should be 18 to 23 degrees, but soil temp is around 25 degrees Celsius, day and night.
So that's a lot warmer than your average house is heated. Like
Yeah.
my basement's probably like 16, which is why I have a germination mat, which raises the temperature by like 8 to 10 degrees, supposedly. So this handy chart I found has like the optimum temperature for seeds to germinate, and as you can see, there's a pretty wide range. Like lettuce will, you know, can sprout at 4 degrees, whereas some things like celery want, you know, 16 degrees, tomatoes want minimum 21, eggplants want 24. So things can sprout, you know, lower or higher than the optimum temperature, but ideally you would have these temperatures because if you're starting seeds in, you know, in any kind of growing medium, the longer that growing medium is sitting there without anything growing in it, the more likely you're gonna get mold. So I find personally it's like a race between, you know, is a mold gonna win, or are my seeds gonna win? And I wanna give my seeds the best chance I can give them, so I raise the temperature with using a germination mat to just speed things along so that they can get a little bit bigger before they have to, you know, compete with that mold.
And then, yeah, humidity, not such a big thing, but then having a fan is a great idea. So it keeps the air moving, cuts down mold growth on the top of your soil, strengthens your seedling. Your soil dries out quicker, but that's just part of that game.
And also, like humidity, it's relatively high. I don't think anybody's house is that high during the winter because we've got our furnaces running. What I sometimes do is I put the seeds on a damp but not wet paper towel, and I just put, you know, I just write down the kind of seed on the paper towel with a Sharpie, and I put them in like a Tupperware and keep the lid slightly ajar so that it doesn't dry out, but it still gets pretty humid in there. So that's one way you can increase humidity for when seeds are germinating. And once I see a little taproot, that's when I pop them into like a little cell like this, or a, you know, a soil block or something like that. So you could also do that.
So lightings, I don't know if ideal light situations in our place. So getting just fluorescent tube bulbs would be sufficient. I read that there should be a cool white and a warm white will get you the ideal light spectrum that you need. And then the distance from it matters, so you should never have it more than 4 inches above your seedling. Closer is better. But
So you can get really expensive, lights that do different colors and whatnot. Those are more for if you're actually trying to get things to fruit indoors. But if you're just trying to get them healthy enough to go outside and be transplanted, then plain white is fine in my experience. And why spend more money than you have to, right? The most important thing is that the lights are close enough. Don't have them a foot away. Keep them close. I put chains and S-hooks on my lights so that I can sort of raise or lower them as needed. That's a pretty easy setup to do. Just S-hooks and some. If you've got shelves with bars, that's already easy. If you're using some kind of wooden shelves, you might need to screw in some a hook or something. But that's fairly easy to set up. System where you can raise and lower the lights. Oh yeah, and last thing, some seeds do require light to germinate, so sometimes you might need lights even before you have sprouts. That kind of info you can probably find on your seed packet. Sometimes the seed packet just says cover lightly, which means just a bare sprinkling of soil. Yes?
Sorry, offhand, do you know which ones? Or what?
Offhand, the one that I grow, and you probably don't, it's a Japanese herb called shiso or perilla. That is one that needs light to germinate. Some herbs, and usually I find it's the smaller seeds. Generally, the bigger the seed, the deeper it goes, ballpark. So yeah, if you've got some really small seeds, maybe just Google it. Just make sure that it's not a kind that needs light to germinate.
And then these are heat mats that can raise up your soil temperature to where you want it at.
Yeah, you can order them on Amazon or Canadian Tire. They're not very expensive, and they are a game changer, I find. I don't use them throughout the sort of indoor growing process. Mostly it's just giving them a boost, when they're seeds or sprouts, but it makes a big difference, I think.
And I think it was Lucy who mentioned that on top of your fridge is also quite warm, so you could put them on there. So your seed trays, they need to be cleaned before you use them. So this is what I do is I soak them in 1 bleach to 9 water. And then these are the standard sizes for them. And then the seed size will determine what size of seed cell that you'll put it into. So let's say squash, they're bigger seed, so you want a deeper cell and bigger cell for them to go into, so they just have space to grow without you having to monkey with their roots before you transplant them up. And then 4-inch, 6-inch, 1-gallon pots are, great sizes to transplant into. So growing medium, this is what I get. It comes with inoculated with mycorrhizal, so it's like mushrooms. It helps aid in their root development. And then if you wanted to make your own for the soil block making, this is what you're gonna put in it. So it's like 3 buckets of peat moss, perlite or vermiculite, so that keeps air through your soil, compost. It shouldn't be leached. Your plants need that nutrients. And then in garden soil, they say just to use something from your own garden, so it's already introduces that activity to your plants. A cup of blood meal. You'll have to increase the blood meal or feather meal when you want to pot up, just because your seedlings will need more nutrients in that next stage of growth. And then lime. So peat moss is low in yeah. You know what I'm trying to say. And then, so the lime will cut that and it'll balance it out and you'll get the right pH that you need.
I use Pro Mix too, and I have for years. 1 year I used something else because the store was out, didn't like it. I think generally most people agree that Pro Mix is a fairly good quality soil mix. And good quality is important because you also hear horror stories about getting fungus gnats or, mold or, bits of plastic even. So yeah, if you're doing it, I think investing in, not the cheapest soil mix, but something like Pro Mix is worthwhile.
And where would you buy that?
Both speed.
Yeah.
And any garden center
Yeah.
would have it.
Canadian
Yeah.
Tire,
Yeah, Canadian Tire had it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They come in various sizes. That's a big one. I go through that, but
Yeah.
Thank you.
I buy the big ones. I find like at Canadian Tire, they leave them like outside, right? I try to get the ones that not on the top because they get rained on and you see rain sitting on it and whatnot. So I try to get one from underneath.
your UV breakdown. Alright, so now you got all your station ready, you have your supplies, now you just wanna fill your trays with moist soil, so you have that bit of Pro Mix, you're gonna wanna add it with water, it's really dusty, and break it into fine pieces, and then you're gonna fill your flats, and you're gonna get rid of some of the air pockets in there, but don't pack it where it's too dense. And then take out the excess, put an indent for your seed, some seeds you wanna do in bunches. So like green onions, I'll plant like a bunch of them in one cell, so I can just harvest it as a bunch. Leeks, you can also do that. Even squash, like pick the best one, right? The hardiest. Water gently, just for the top. So you can cover with soil or vermiculite. Soil, I try to use that for bigger seeds. Vermiculite, I like to use on smaller seeds just because sometimes they have a hard time poking through the soil, so vermiculite's a little lighter. Don't forget to label, date, and your variety. Put your trays on the growing mat, the ones that need anything. Not all of them want that warm temperature, so knowing which ones want it. And then, 2 to 7 days you'll have your seeds, and some will be a bit longer.
So, plants generally need 12 to 16 hours of light. More is better, but don't do 24 hours because I think plants like us need to sleep, and I feel like they actually seem to get bigger overnight, like as in darkness. So generally, periods of darkness are important as well, but bare minimum is 12 hours, ideally more like 14 or 16, and keeps the lights close to the tops of the plants. Fans can strengthen seedlings if they have weak stems, just a little bit of movement. And you don't want seedlings that, the moment you put them outside, they're gonna just keel over because they're not used to any wind. They're gonna have to get used to it, so it's just a little bit, doesn't have to be on 24/7, but even, a few hours a day could help. And as they grow bigger, like this is pretty small, so, as they get bigger and they get crowded, I'll be moving these from here to a bigger pot, and sometimes I end up moving them again to an even bigger pot. And sometimes some plants benefit from pruning or trimming, like some herbs. You don't want them to get too tall, you want them to get bushier or something like that. And then we'll also talk about the common problems and solutions.
So you don't wanna not water your plants. Too much will lead to fungal disease, dampening it off, or just too soggy. So your initial water will be on top, but then you can start watering it from the bottom. So if you get a tray like that, some don't have holes in it, and you could just fill that with water, sink your other tray into it, and then it'll just absorb.
Yeah, and it's got these grooves, so it's not all flat on the bottom, and the grooves help with a little bit of drainage so that your plant doesn't take up too much water.
Large cells require more water, so pass twice just on this, or first to go, and then the water will draw itself down once your hydrogen.
Also sometimes when your soil is really dry, it becomes hydrophobic, which means the water just sits on top in a lump and doesn't really go in. So if you just pass over the water once, it might not even sink in. So do it once, wait a little until you see that things are getting moist, and then maybe another time.
So you just watch the edges that are closer to furnaces or on the south side of the greenhouse. And then outside temperatures, if it's really warm outside and sunny, your seedlings will dry out faster than if it were a cool, cloudy day.
Oh yeah, and about watering's always tricky. It's like too much, too little, they're both a problem, right? Very, very ballpark, but personally I feel like if your plant is like sagging and soft and limp, then it doesn't have enough water. If it's crisp, it actually has too much water and the cells are dying. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but yeah, if you're seeing crisp, like tomato leaves that are crisp around the edges, I try to water a little less, just be really mindful and careful. If I see them going like this, then give them lots of water.
So after your seedlings have emerged, you're gonna watch for a certain stage. So at that second plant from the right is just showing its first true leaves, the true leaves just opening up, and then it's gonna put up another set of leaves. And that's when you are going to feed your seedling. So what they recommend is dilute it to like half the recommended rate. Twice a week, I don't know, once or twice, depends on your regiment. And then fish emulsion or seaweed. I like these fertilizers, they're full of micronutrients, and you'll see your seedlings change within a day or two. Yeah, it's full of micronutrients, but I don't know, open the windows. Outside.
And sort of like water, you also don't want to over fertilize it. Like especially when the plants are really small, they're like little children. You don't want to feed them a lasagna and a pizza and meatball and spaghetti at the same time. Keep it slow at first and just gradually sort of see how it goes and maybe increase it if your plants seem to be, liking it and doing well. But more isn't always better.
They outgrow their containers fast, and then you gotta have space, and your space may
Yeah.
not be ready.
Yeah.
Consider. So potting up is transferring your seedling from a small to a larger container. These would be your peppers, tomato, cucumbers, eggplant. Why I have cucumbers are how that they don't like their roots mess around with too much, so be very careful when you work with them. So you hold it, I hold it, I don't know, this stem here, and just try not to monkey around with the roots a bit, and then pinch the bottom of the cell, and then it should come up or stick something in the bottom of it. If sometimes I will see a whole row of things together, and I'm like, okay, now I gotta separate these roots and transplant them, so I'll just put some water on it, and they will separate a bit easier. But yeah, gently pack the soil around it in water. Yeah, don't pot up your weak or sick seedlings. It's just a waste of time and soil.
Just an observation on separating plants when they're a little bit tight. I found good success using an X-Acto knife and cutting them apart instead of trying to pull them
Right.
apart. There's less damage. I know it feels bad to cut all those roots, but really they're at least clean cuts and it doesn't destroy.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the tugging isn't
Yeah,
really
it's hard
doing
on
it any favors.
Yeah.
There are some plants that tolerate it quite well, like find basil, for all that it's kind of a drama queen when it's growing outside. Inside it's quite cooperative and I can, transplant them, but there are other plants that you transplant and then they seem to just not do anything for 3 weeks.
Well, that's in particular the one that lends itself to being cut up with an X-Acto knife because they tend to grow tight
Okay.
and then you can cut them
Yeah.
and they seem to prosper.
Yeah.
I tend to do that with perennials, where you don't mind losing a couple, but you want a big clump to put into your garden.
Okay.
When you're growing in bigger trays, then the rows rather than individuals. You want to divide them out to put them individually. is with your fingers and you can pull each and every single one apart and plant them. And don't grab them by the stem. Never, ever, ever. Always by the leaf. Less chance of damaging. A leaf will reproduce again. A stem will just die.
Yeah.
So by doing that, you're not damaging your stems at all. From years of working in greenhouses, correct?
Yeah.
It's the easiest and the fastest way to do it.
And that's a good point. I find like if the, you know, if I'm trying to separate things that are growing too close together, like herbs, and the pot is soggy and wet, then it's just putting more weight onto the fragile, stems and the roots. So yeah, semi-dry works better. If I'm lucky, I can just sort of shake the soil loose. But yeah, if it's soggy, then I would wait because it's just gonna rip more. That whole mass of soil is so wet and heavy.
And if you can, especially nowadays, instead of using peat moss, which is bad to be using because there are many reasons I'm not getting into, but you can buy in the blocks is the coconut. I don't know if you guys use that coconut. You soak that in warm water and it'll come up just as big as anything. And environmentally, it's 1,000 times better for it to be using. And in your Promex, the BX is what you use for this kind of stuff. HP is what you use for your little pots.
Yeah.
Different soil. Sorry.
No, it's all good.
Thank you.
Various methods. Yes. Pinching is when you want to have your seedlings branch out. So basil is a good one. I do zinnias for cut flowers. You want those to branch out as well, so it produces more. Tomatoes, you do that to sucker them, so they branch out.
Yeah, and onions and chives, like Wendy's already started hers. They take a long time and they can grow pretty wispy and long, but you don't want wispy and long. So when I grow them, I just cut them so that they're only like 4 to 6 inches long, and that way they get a little sturdier and less wispy like hair.
So some of your problems, your seeds don't sprout. That could be, I don't know, old seed.
Too cold.
Yeah. Or they dampen off, so you have too much water, and they just wither at the base and won't come up. They get leggy and weak, that's because they don't have enough sunlight, and then you get your pest and mold on soil.
Generally, it's a good idea to keep other houseplants away from your seedlings because, I mean, maybe you know 100% that they don't have anything, but unless you're really sure, let's not potentially bring pests into your seedlings because your seedlings are not as strong as your houseplant is. So if something gets on them, they're gonna die. Yeah, and damping off happens to the best of us. It's when like a otherwise healthy looking sprout or young seedling, they just kind of flop over and it looks like they've almost been pinched at the base where the soil is, and it's just, yeah, it just gets, the cells there are dead. And that often happens, as the name suggests, when things are too damp. So a fan is a good idea at that stage. Also, I found some soil mixes were more prone to that than others. Kind of have to, try it and see, maybe I got an old batch, or maybe I kept it in my shed and it got rained on or something like that. Things happen. So it could be your soil that's at fault. It could be you watering it too much. But it does happen, and once you see it happening, then really be careful about how much you water because that's a big component of that. So one way to avoid, like, I hate it when I've got cells like this and 1 out of 6 is there's nothing growing in it. It really annoys me. So I actually test my seeds for germination before sowing. So you can do that kind of two ways. One way is like even in January or December, before you're actually growing it, you can take 10 seeds, put it on a damp paper towel, put it in a warm spot and see how many come up. And so if only 6 come up, that means you're gonna want to start more seeds if you actually want 10. If all 10 come up, that's great, your seeds are really strong. I sometimes just do that like in February or March when I'm actually starting them, and I transplant, I take the sprouted seeds and put them in here only after they've sprouted, just so that I don't end up with these, gaps, which are really annoying. So that's one way to know that your seeds are viable and alive. Of course, even, healthy seeds, if it's not the right temperature, it's not gonna sprout. So some things just really need a high temperature, like eggplants or peppers. Generally, those are the plants that grow in hotter climates anyway. Things like kale or lettuce, they're usually fine at room temperature. So germination mats help, like Janna said, always clean and sanitize your pots, especially if you're like me and reusing stuff. Make sure that you're not, just inadvertently inoculating everything with last year's mold. Use a quality growing medium. Bottom watering instead of watering from above helps, because oftentimes that white mold you see is on the surface and not down below. So if you can keep the surface from getting too wet, that's great. Water sparingly, which is really tricky because then you also don't water enough. But I mean, maybe I'm a little too paranoid, but I check my seedlings twice a day, morning and night, and just make sure that everybody's happy, because it's a tiny seedling. It doesn't take a lot to kill them. Yeah, fans are great. Doesn't have to be on all the time, but just a little bit, just a bit of air circulation. Don't over fertilize, because sometimes that's can be harmful too. And important thing, don't start too early, because the earlier you start, the longer you're gonna have to, keep them from getting sick, keep them from drying out, keep them from getting too wet. It's a lot of worry. So it's kind of figuring out what works for you, what's the best timing, because you also don't want, 3-foot tall tomato plants in May.
We're on to transplanting. So you want to check your seed packet of when you want, or when you want to transplant. But we looked at those other frost dates, and it's around like June 2nd. You could start putting them outside, or to transplant the frost hardy ones anyway. So that would be your brassicas. Those prefer cooler temperatures, so you can set those out. So soil needs to be warm, just not the air temperatures, and nighttime highs also impact it. And so some plants will like protection, so like when you're planting them out, just make sure you have protection around it, just in case you get that frost.
Yeah, and protection could even be like a big pile of leaves. Like if it's gonna be a little chilly overnight, just throw dried leaves on top, and even that helps a little bit.
So you want to start preparing your garden beds while your seedlings are waiting to come outside. So you meant your soil, till it, or brought for. You can put your plastic mulch down, so that heats up the soil a bit as well. Or regular mulch, your drip irrigation, or your watering systems. For me, I have full drip system that I have to put in, and then remove your weeds, and you can start direct sowing your early crops. So your peas, radishes, spinach, all your cool season crops. So your garden bed is ready. Now you can harden off your transplants.
Yes, so that process takes up to a week. I find there isn't really a way to hurry it up. If you get impatient, you always get burned. So you start slow and work your way up. So you're trying to get your baby plants to get used to being outside, and outside is really sunny, more than they can tolerate at first. It's windy, it can be cold, it can rain. Lots of things happen that don't happen inside your house, obviously. So you're trying to get them used to it and increase the plant's tolerance. They can get sunburned really quickly, even in like, 30 minutes or an hour if it's a really strong sunny day. You notice because the leaves kind of look a little gray or like a little paler. And it can take plants weeks to recover, so always exercise caution. So a shaded, sheltered spot is good at first. If you don't have that, you could even just put like sheer curtains on top. That's what I do, a mesh or something like that. Just cover them up so that it's not getting so much sunlight, all at once. And watch out for strong sun and strong winds. Ideally, you wouldn't do it like, first thing in the morning before you go to work, because who knows what's gonna happen, it might get really sunny, it might get really windy. So if you have to do that, just find a spot where it's, it's gonna be, not so sunny because it's kind of behind your shed or something like that. You've done so much hard work for so many weeks, you don't wanna kill them right before they go into the ground.
So transplanting, so you watch for your forecast. Sometimes they'll be a bit warmer, we don't know. So you could take those opportunities to put them out. So you plant in the morning on a cloudy day or in the late afternoon, in the sunny weather. And then you water your seedlings really well before they go into the ground, because the ground is dry and it's just gonna suck the moisture away from your transplants. Make sure you know where they're going in your garden. I always run into this problem every year of that shouldn't be there, but it is now. But and then correct spacing. And don't leave air pockets around the seedling, it'll dry them out. And they need the compacted, or not compacted, but tight soil around them so they can root into the ground. And then you want to bury the seedling, or the root ball completely, so it doesn't dry out. I know tomato seeds, you can actually bury them quite deep, so the hairs on their stem can actually turn into roots, so you could get extra strong roots for tomato plants. Water after transplanting. Some don't like to be buried at all, or deeper, so you always gotta make sure that it's level with the soil surface. You gotta keep them moist throughout their early stages of growth. Once they become established, you can wean off watering them as much. And then, just make sure that if they are susceptible to like heat or not exactly hard enough just yet, then you can just cover them with row cover. And then your frost hardy plants can go out first week of June, and frost intolerant I usually do the second week of June.
Yeah, and sometimes, there's some wiggle room if you're planting in containers or in buckets, because then you can move them inside if you need to. And also, a container that's sitting on your deck is always gonna be warmer than the soil in the ground. So if you're doing containers, then you can plant a little earlier, just be prepared to put them into the garage.